Here's a compilation of the creepiest, most disturbing stories I covered this week. Whether you're binging late at night or just looking for a scare, sit back, relax, and enjoy the best of the week. The first story takes place at Jefferson High School in 2018. It was an ordinary Tuesday in November, and students were just finishing up third period. The halls were starting to fill with teenagers chatting about weekend plans, homework assignments, and the upcoming basketball game. 16-year-old Megan was at her locker, exchanging her history textbook for chemistry notes when the announcement came over the PA system. The principal's voice was different than usual, tense, controlled, but with an unmistakable edge of urgency. "This is not a drill. We are in lockdown. All students and staff implement lockdown procedures immediately." The hallway froze for a split second before erupting into controlled chaos. Teachers emerged from classrooms, ushering students inside, any classroom, not necessarily their own. Megan was quickly pulled into Mrs. Henderson's English class by a teacher she barely knew. The door was locked, lights turned off, and within moments, 30 students were huddled in the back corner of the room, as far from the windows and door as possible. Mrs. Henderson whispered instructions to stay absolutely silent and to turn phones to silent mode. No one knew what was happening. For nearly 2 hours, they sat in darkness, the only light coming from the occasional glow of a phone, as students desperately checked for information, texted parents, or read news alerts. What made this particularly terrifying wasn't just the uncertainty, it was that they could hear things. Around 40 minutes into the lockdown, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate steps that paused outside each classroom door. Then came the sound that still haunts Megan's dreams. The metallic click and rattle of someone testing the doorknob to their classroom, trying to get in. Mrs. Henderson motioned for absolute silence, her finger pressed firmly to her lips as tears streamed down several students' faces. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully this time. Someone on the other side was trying to get in. Then a man's voice, unfamiliar and angry, muttered something inaudible before moving on to the next classroom. Later, they learned the truth. An armed man had entered the school looking for his ex-girlfriend, a language arts teacher who had recently filed a restraining order against him. He had somehow bypassed the front office security and made it into the building during class change when doors were briefly opened. The school resource officer had spotted him on security cameras and initiated the lockdown immediately. Police arrived within minutes, but it took time to search the large campus building by building. The man was eventually apprehended by police in the teacher's lounge without anyone getting hurt, but those students will never forget the sound of those doorknobs being tested while they sat in darkness, not knowing if they would make it home that day. "I still get anxious whenever I hear a doorknob turning," Megan shared. "It's been years, but that specific sound just takes me right back to that classroom." Our second story happened at a middle school in Oregon during what should have been an ordinary lunch period. Westridge Middle School had just implemented new security measures that fall, with staff receiving updated training on emergency protocols. Little did they know they'd be putting that training to use sooner than expected. It was 12:15 p.m. on a Wednesday when Principal Davis suddenly came on the intercom, his voice calm but firm. "Teachers and staff, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill." The cafeteria, filled with nearly 200 students midway through lunch, fell silent for a moment before the trained cafeteria monitors sprang into action. They directed students to quickly and quietly move to the nearest classrooms, leaving behind half-eaten lunches and backpacks. 12-year-old Tyler was sitting with friends when the announcement came. "At first we thought it was another drill," he recalled. "We'd had 2 that semester already, but something in the principal's voice made this feel different." Teachers rushed students from the cafeteria into nearby classrooms while those already in rooms locked doors and covered windows. What made this lockdown especially unsettling was the reason behind it. A former student who had been expelled 3 months earlier for making threats had returned to campus. The boy, whose name was withheld due to his age, had been spotted by a teacher entering a side door that had been propped open by a student. He was wearing a heavy backpack and had a hooded sweatshirt pulled low over his face. The teacher recognized him immediately and alerted the office. For over an hour, students hid under desks and in storage closets while armed police methodically searched the building room by room. Social studies teacher Ms. Roberts had 28 7th graders crammed into her classroom storage closet, a space designed for supplies, not people. I had kids pressed against map rolls and textbook stacks, she remembered. Some were crying silently. I just kept whispering that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure myself. 7th grader Emma had the presence of mind to record snippets of audio on her phone, hushed voices of her classmates crying and whimpering while their teacher tried to comfort them with whispered reassurances. The recording later became evidence in the investigation. The school's new silent alarm system had immediately alerted police, who arrived within 4 minutes of the lockdown being initiated. They established a perimeter and began a systematic search. Parents, alerted by texts from their frightened children, gathered outside the police barricade, desperate for information. After an excruciating 72 minutes in lockdown, police finally found the former student hiding in a third-floor bathroom. The backpack that had caused so much concern turned out to contain only clothes and a notebook. He had apparently planned to stay at the school overnight to send a message to the administration who had expelled him. However, when police examined his phone, they found search history for school shootings and information about making improvised explosives. He was taken into custody and later charged with trespassing and making terroristic threats. While no one was physically harmed, the psychological impact on the school community was significant. The school brought in counselors for weeks afterward, and attendance dropped noticeably. "I still check where the exits are whenever I go into a room," said Tyler, now in high school. "That day changed how I see safety forever." The third incident occurred during what should have been a celebration at Westlake High School in California. It was Spirit Week, and the entire student body of over 1,200 students was gathered in the gymnasium for a morning pep rally. The cheerleaders had just finished their routine, and the principal, Dr. Hendricks, was about to announce the senior class homecoming court when his assistant hurried across the gym floor and handed him a note. Those in the front rows noticed the immediate change in his demeanor. He took a deep breath, approached the microphone, and with remarkable composure said, "Students and staff, I need everyone to quickly and quietly return to your homeroom classrooms for an emergency lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, implement lockdown procedures immediately." The gymnasium, moments before filled with cheering and music, fell into a tense hush before teachers began directing students to exit in an orderly fashion. Senior class president Jordan was seated in the front row when it happened. "It was surreal," she recalled. "One minute we're all hyped up about homecoming, and the next we're being told to hide. The scariest part was that we had no idea why." What the students didn't know as they filed back to their classrooms was that police had received a call about someone with what appeared to be a rifle walking toward the school. A parent dropping off a late student had reported seeing a young male in a dark jacket carrying what looked like a gun case, or possibly a disassembled rifle partially covered by a blanket. As students made their way back to homerooms, teachers were frantically counting heads and locking doors behind them. Some classrooms had 40 or more students crammed inside, far more than their normal capacity, as teachers prioritized getting everyone behind locked doors rather than sticking to assigned rooms. Jessica, a junior, described sitting in complete silence for 3 hours, the only sound being occasional police radio chatter from the hallway as SWAT teams methodically cleared the building. "People were texting their parents that they loved them," she said. "I remember a boy near me was writing a note to his little sister in case something happened to him. We really thought we might die that day." The scariest part for many students was when SWAT officers began clearing rooms. They would unlock and burst into each classroom with weapons drawn, quickly scanning for threats before moving students into cleared areas. "When the door burst open and I saw those guns, my heart nearly stopped," remembered Eric, who was a freshman at the time. "Even though they were there to help us, having rifles pointed in your direction, even briefly, is something you don't forget." After the entire campus was cleared, students were reunited with frantic parents at a nearby shopping center parking lot that had been designated as the reunification point. It turned out to be what police call a swatting incident. Someone had called in a false report with the intention of triggering a massive police response. Investigators later traced the call to an IP address in another state, but the person responsible was never identified. Even though it was ultimately a hoax, the psychological impact on students and staff was very real. The school brought in trauma counselors, and attendance was optional for the remainder of that week. Every loud noise in school made people jump for months afterward, Jordan said. And whenever we had scheduled lockdown drills later that year, some students would have panic attacks or just stay home that day. The fourth and final story takes place at Sunshine Elementary School in Florida, where the vulnerability of the youngest students made an already frightening situation even more distressing. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in April, warm enough that Ms. Collins had taken her first grade class outside for their reading circle under the big oak tree near the playground. As the 6-year-olds took turns sounding out words from their readers, Ms. Collins noticed something that made her blood run cold. A strange man walking slowly around the playground perimeter, watching the children. He was dressed inappropriately for the warm weather in a long coat, and kept one hand in his pocket while using the other to periodically touch the chain-link fence. Something about his behavior set off alarm bells in her mind. Ms. Collins had been teaching for 22 years, and her instincts told her something was very wrong. She casually instructed her teaching assistant to gather the children and take them inside for a surprise activity, while she quickly called the front office on her cell phone. Within seconds, Principal Garcia's voice came over the outdoor and indoor speakers. Teachers and staff, implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. What makes this story particularly disturbing is how kindergarten teacher Mrs. Rodriguez had to keep 25 5-year-olds completely silent while hiding in a supply closet barely big enough for all of them. They didn't understand the concept of a bad person potentially being in the school, she later explained. How do you make a kindergartner understand the need for complete silence without traumatizing them? She described singing very quiet songs with them and telling them it was a special silence game where the best quiet class would get extra recess time. She had them practice butterfly breathing, taking deep breaths with their hands fluttering like wings to keep them calm and quiet. Meanwhile, first grade teacher Ms. Collins was dealing with her own classroom of young children who had seen her reaction to the man outside and were more aware that something frightening was happening. One little girl asked me if the bad man was going to hurt us, Ms. Collins recalled, her voice breaking. How do you answer that honestly without causing panic? I just told her that our school had special doors to keep us safe, and the police were coming to help us. Outside, police discovered the man was James Thornton, a recently released convict with a history of violence against women and children who had somehow gotten onto school grounds despite the security measures. He was apprehended trying to enter through a side door that led directly to the kindergarten wing. When officers searched him, they found a hunting knife and zip ties in his coat pockets. Later, security footage showed he had been watching the school for days, learning the schedule and routine of the staff and students. He had been particularly focused on when and where the youngest children had their outdoor activities. What haunts me most is the premeditation, said Officer Ramirez, who was first on the scene. This wasn't random. He had been planning this, watching these little kids, learning their routines. The lockdown lasted nearly 2 hours as police thoroughly searched the entire campus to ensure there were no accomplices. For Mrs. Rodriguez, keeping 25 kindergartners silent and calm for that long was perhaps the greatest challenge of her teaching career. I had children who needed to use the bathroom, who were hungry, who didn't understand why we were all crammed in a dark closet instead of having snack time, she recalled. I was singing the quietest songs I've ever sung, making up stories in whispers, anything to keep them from crying out or getting scared. Parents were notified of the lockdown via the school's emergency alert system, creating a chaotic scene outside as hundreds of frightened adults gathered beyond the police perimeter. The reunification process took hours, with each child being individually checked out to verified guardians. In the aftermath, the school installed additional security cameras, reinforced all exterior doors, and implemented a buddy system where teachers would no longer take classes outside alone. The most profound change, however, was in how the teachers viewed their responsibility. I realized that day that I wasn't just responsible for teaching these children to read and write, said Ms. Collins. I was potentially responsible for keeping them alive. That changes how you see your job forever. These 4 stories remind us that while lockdowns are designed to keep students and staff safe, they can be genuinely traumatic experiences that leave lasting psychological impacts. Teachers and students often have no idea what's happening during these events, which makes them all the more frightening. The uncertainty, not knowing if there's a real threat, how serious it is, or how long they'll be locked down, compounds the fear. For many students, these experiences fundamentally change their sense of safety at school. Several of the people interviewed for these stories mentioned developing anxiety, hypervigilance, or post-traumatic stress symptoms afterward. Schools increasingly recognize the need for psychological support following such events, even when no physical harm occurs. The emotional safety of students is just as important as their physical safety, noted Dr. Keller, a school psychologist who has worked with several districts on post-lockdown mental health initiatives. We're seeing more schools implementing trauma-informed approaches to help students process these experiences. Perhaps most disturbing is how lockdowns have become normalized in American education. No longer rare emergency measures, but regular occurrences that students and teachers must be prepared for. Regular drills, while necessary, serve as constant reminders of potential danger. I remember when fire drills were the only safety drills we did, reflected Principal Garcia from Sunshine Elementary. Now we train for active threats the same way we train for natural disasters. It's a sad reality of modern education. If you've ever experienced a lockdown situation at school, whether as a student, teacher, or parent, feel free to share your story in the comments below. These experiences, while difficult to talk about, help others understand the real impact of these events. And as always, stay safe, everyone. The knocking at 3 a.m. This first story comes from a viewer named Sarah who asked to stay anonymous. Back in 2019, Sarah was a college student living in a small rental house in Ohio. It was a quiet neighborhood. Think picket fences, kids' bikes on lawns, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. Sarah's roommates had gone home for winter break, so she had the place to herself for 2 weeks. She didn't mind. She liked the peace and quiet. On the 3rd night alone, Sarah was up late studying, her laptop glowing in the dark living room. It was around 2:45 a.m. when she heard it. A soft knock at the front door. She froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? She waited, heart pounding, hoping it was a mistake. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. Sarah crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. The porch was empty. No car in the driveway. No one on the street. Just darkness. She told herself it was probably a prank, maybe some kids messing around. But as she turned back to her laptop, the knocking started again, this time from the back door. Sarah's stomach dropped. The back door was through the kitchen, out of sight from where she stood. She grabbed her phone, ready to call 911, and tiptoed toward the kitchen. The knocking stopped just as she reached the door. She checked the lock. It was secure, and peered through the small window. Nothing but the backyard, bathed in moonlight. Relieved but shaken, Sarah went back to the living room. She was about to sit down when she heard something worse than knocking. A faint scrape, like someone dragging their nails across the window behind her. She spun around, but the blinds were closed. She couldn't see out, and whatever was out there could be looking in. Her hands were trembling as she dialed 911. The operator told her to stay calm and lock herself in a room until police arrived. Sarah barricaded herself in her bedroom, pushing a dresser against the door. The police showed up 15 minutes later and searched the property. They found no one, no footprints, no signs of tampering. But they did find something odd. Faint scratch marks on the living room window, too high up to be from an animal. Sarah stayed with a friend for the rest of the break. She never found out who or what was knocking that night, but she swears she heard that same scraping sound outside her friend's house a week later. Story 2. The Voice in the Attic. Our next story comes from a Reddit user who went by Sleepless in TX. This happened in 2017 in a rural part of Texas. The user, let's call him Jake, had just moved into an old farmhouse he'd inherited from his grandfather. The place was a fixer-upper, creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, but Jake was excited to make it his own. He was living there alone while he worked on renovations. One night, Jake was watching TV in the living room when he heard a thump from above. The farmhouse had a small attic, accessible through a hatch in the hallway ceiling. Jake figured it was just a rat, or maybe a loose board settling. Old houses make noises, right? But then he heard it again. Thump, thump, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Jake grabbed a flashlight and a broom, telling himself he'd scare off whatever critter was up there. He pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up, heart racing. The attic was cramped, filled with dusty boxes and insulation. His flashlight beam swept across the space, but nothing moved. No rats, no raccoons, nothing. Just as he was about to climb down, he heard a whisper. It was soft, like someone muttering under their breath, but it was coming from the far corner of the attic. Jake froze, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking. The whispering stopped. He didn't wait to hear it again. He scrambled down the ladder, slammed the hatch shut, and locked it with a padlock he found in the garage. That night, he barely slept, jumping at every creak in the house. The next day, Jake called a friend to help him check the attic in daylight. They found nothing, no signs of anyone living up there, no disturbed dust, nothing. But as they were leaving, Jake's friend noticed something carved into the underside of the hatch. The word, "listen." Jake moved out a month later. He said the final straw was waking up one night to the sound of whispering, coming from inside his bedroom. Story 3, The Man in the Basement. Our final story comes from a viewer named Alex, who shared this just last year. Alex lived in a suburban house in Oregon with his parents, but they were on vacation, leaving him alone for a week. The house was old, with a creepy basement that Alex avoided. Think damp concrete, exposed pipes, and a single flickering bulb. One afternoon, Alex was doing laundry when he realized the detergent was in the basement. Grumbling, he grabbed a flashlight and headed down. The air was cold, the stairs creaking under his weight. He found the detergent and was about to head back up when he heard a low chuckle. It was faint, but unmistakable, coming from the far corner of the basement. Alex's flashlight beam darted around, catching shelves of old paint cans and a rusty bike. But no one was there. He called out, "Who's there?" No answer. He bolted upstairs, locking the basement door behind him. That night, he kept hearing noises, thumps, scratches, and once, that same chuckle, muffled through the floor. He called his parents, who told him it was probably pipes or the house settling. But Alex wasn't convinced. The next day, he worked up the courage to check the basement again, this time with a baseball bat. He found something chilling, a sleeping bag, tucked behind a stack of boxes, with an empty water bottle and a half-eaten candy bar next to it. Someone had been living down there. Alex called the police, who found signs of forced entry through a small basement window. Whoever had been there was gone, but they'd left behind a note scratched into the wall. "Thanks for the stay." Alex and his family moved shortly after. He says he still checks every basement before he enters a new house. Story 4, The Shadow in the Hallway. This story comes from a viewer who emailed me just a few months ago. Let's call her Lisa. In early 2024, Lisa was house-sitting for her aunt in a big old Victorian house in Massachusetts. Her aunt was away for a weekend, and Lisa was excited for some alone time, until the first night. Lisa was reading in the living room when she noticed the hallway light flickering. It was one of those long corridors, lined with family photos and a single bulb at the far end. She got up to check it, but as she stepped into the hallway, the light steadied, and she saw a shadow. It was tall, human-shaped, and stretched across the wall, like someone was standing just out of sight. But the hallway was empty. Lisa called out, "Hello?" No answer. She chalked it up to her imagination and went back to her book. Later that night, she woke up to footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps, pacing the hallway outside her room. Lisa grabbed her phone and peeked out. The hallway was dark, the bulb burned out. But in the faint moonlight from a window, she saw it. A shadow moving along the wall, back and forth, like it was pacing. No one was casting it. Terrified, she locked the door and stayed awake until morning. When she checked the hallway at dawn, the bulb was back on, flickering again. But here's the kicker. One of her aunt's old photos, a black and white shot of a man in a suit, was turned backward on the wall. Lisa swears it was facing forward the night before. She left that morning and never house-sat there again. Her aunt later admitted the house had odd moments, but wouldn't say more. Story 5. The Car That Waited. Our last story comes from a viewer named Taylor, who shared this in 2021. Taylor lived alone in a rural cabin in Montana, miles from the nearest town. It was peaceful, until one night in late fall. Taylor was winding down, reading by the fire, when she noticed headlights outside. Through the window, she saw a car parked at the end of her long driveway, engine running, lights on. It just sat there, idling. She figured it was someone lost. Her cabin was off a winding back road, easy to miss a turn. She waited, expecting them to leave. But 20 minutes passed, then 30, and the car didn't move. No one got out, no honk, nothing. Just those headlights cutting through the dark. Taylor grabbed her binoculars, her dad's old hunting pair, and tried to get a look. The car was too far to see details, but she could make out a shape in the driver's seat, hunched over, still. She called her brother, who lived an hour away, and he told her to stay inside and call the sheriff. The sheriff arrived 45 minutes later, and as soon as his cruiser's lights hit the driveway, the car peeled out, tires screeching. He chased it but lost it on a side road. When he checked Taylor's property, he found tire tracks and a single cigarette butt, still warm, right where the car had been. Taylor never found out who it was. The sheriff said it could have been a hunter, a drifter, or someone casing the place. She got a security camera after that, but she says she still wakes up some nights, convinced she hears an engine idling outside. Story 6. The Neighbor's Lights. This next story was posted on a neighborhood watch board in 2018 by someone we'll call Jenna. Jenna lived alone in a duplex in Seattle, sharing a wall with her neighbor, an older guy named Tom. Tom was friendly but kept to himself, and Jenna liked the arrangement, quiet and simple. One night, Jenna was home alone when she noticed something odd. Tom's lights, visible through her kitchen window, started turning on and off. First the living room, then the kitchen, then upstairs. It wasn't random. It was like someone was moving through the house. But Tom had told her he'd be out of town for a week, visiting family. Jenna watched for a while, figuring maybe he'd come back early. But then she heard a noise through the shared wall, a low rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on the drywall. She texted Tom, asking if he was home. He replied instantly, "No, still in Portland. Why?" Jenna's stomach sank. She called the cops, keeping an eye on the lights. They kept flicking on and off, room by room, like a pattern. When the police arrived, they searched Tom's side of the duplex. No one was there, no forced entry, no signs of a break-in. But they did find something unsettling. Every light switch was sticky with some kind of residue, like someone with dirty hands had been touching them. Tom had no explanation, and neither did the cops. Jenna moved out a month later. She said the worst part was realizing the tapping stopped the second the police knocked on Tom's door, like whoever was there knew she'd called them. Story 6. The Delivery That Never Came. This one comes from a viewer named Chris, who sent this in back in 2022. Chris lived alone in a quiet suburb in Colorado, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors. One evening, he was home cooking dinner when his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, but he figured it might be a late delivery. He'd ordered a book a few days earlier. Chris checked his front door camera on his phone. Sure enough, there was a guy in a hoodie holding a small package, face hidden under the hood. "Leave it on the porch," Chris called through the app. The guy nodded, set the package down, and walked off. Chris waited a minute, then opened the door to grab it. But when he stepped outside, the package was gone, and so was the delivery guy. Confused, Chris checked the camera footage again. The video showed the guy placing the package, walking away, and then, seconds later, darting back from the side of the frame to snatch it before disappearing into the dark. Chris called the delivery company. No record of a drop-off that night. He brushed it off as a weird prank, but the next night, the doorbell rang again. Same hoodie, same package, same routine. This time, Chris didn't say anything. He just watched. The guy lingered longer, staring at the camera, before leaving with the package again. By the third night, Chris was on edge. When the doorbell rang, he grabbed a bat and flung the door open mid-visit. The guy bolted, dropping the package in the yard. Chris picked it up. It was just an empty box, no label, no weight. The police found no fingerprints, but they did spot fresh scratches on Chris's back door lock, like someone had been testing it. Chris installed a deadbolt and a floodlight after that. He never saw the guy again, but he says he still gets chills thinking about what might have happened if he hadn't opened the door that third night. First up, we've got Emily, a freshman at a small liberal arts college in Ohio back in 2018. Emily was over the moon to move into her dorm, a gorgeous old building from the 1800s, with ivy crawling up the brick walls, tall arched windows, and wooden floors that groaned underfoot. It had character, history, the kind of place that felt alive with stories. She was on the third floor, rooming with Sarah, a laid-back art major who became her instant best friend. The first few weeks were pure college bliss, midnight ramen runs, decorating their room with string lights, and dodging boring lectures. But around mid-October, when the air got crisp and the campus quieted down, things took a turn. One night, Emily woke up around 3 a.m., her room pitch black except for the faint glow of her laptop. She heard whispering, soft, rhythmic, like someone murmuring just outside her door. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like a conversation she couldn't quite catch. She figured it was other students in the hall, maybe coming back from a party or cramming for a test. She pulled her blanket up and tried to sleep, but the sound stuck in her head. The next night, it happened again, same time, 3 a.m., but clearer. She could almost make out words, phrases like, "not here," or "no rest," repeated in a low, urgent tone. Sarah was snoring softly, her side of the room cluttered with sketchbooks, so Emily knew it wasn't her. She got up, heart thumping, and cracked the door to check the hallway. Nothing. Just the flicker of old fluorescent lights and that faint dorm smell of laundry and burnt popcorn. She crawled back into bed, telling herself it was her imagination, maybe stress from midterms. But it kept happening, night after night, always at 3 a.m., always that same eerie murmur. One weekend, Sarah went home, leaving Emily alone. She stayed up, determined to figure it out. Right on cue, the whispering started, but this time it felt closer, like it was seeping through the walls themselves. She pressed her ear to the plaster, holding her breath. The words were sharper, "not here, not here," and then a faint scrape, like nails dragging across wood. She yanked her ear away, her skin prickling. She checked every inch of the room, under the beds, behind the curtains, even the heating vent. Nothing. The next day, she hit the campus library, digging through old records. She found something chilling. Her dorm had been a makeshift hospital during the 1918 flu pandemic. The third floor was a quarantine ward, packed with beds for the sickest patients. Dozens died there, some alone, some delirious with fever. Locals swore the building never felt right after, with stories of voices and footsteps going back decades. Emily wasn't one for ghosts, but the facts lined up too well. Things got worse. One night, she woke to her desk chair spinning slowly, creaking as it turned, like someone had brushed past it. Sarah swore she hadn't touched it. She'd been asleep. Another time, Emily came back from class to find her textbooks stacked neatly on the floor, though she'd left them in a messy pile on her desk. She started sleeping with a lamp on, but the whispering didn't care. It came every night, sometimes louder, sometimes so soft it was almost worse. By December, Emily was a mess, jumping at shadows, failing quizzes because she couldn't focus. She told Sarah everything, and they both noticed small things. Cold spots in the room, drawers opening on their own. Sarah admitted she'd heard the whispers too, but didn't want to freak Emily out. They requested a room change, but the dorm was full, so Emily stuck it out until winter break. She moved out for good in January, crashing with a friend off campus. Years later, she still checks her room at night, half expecting to hear that chant again. She never went back to that dorm, and when she drives by, she swears the third-floor windows look darker than the rest. Our second story comes from Jake, a junior at a big state university in Texas in 2021. Jake and his buddies, Matt and Tyler, wanted freedom, so they rented a cheap apartment off campus. The place was a dive. Cracked walls, water stains like Rorschach tests, and a weird musty smell no amount of air freshener could kill. But it was theirs, and at $400 a month split 3 ways, they weren't complaining. They'd throw parties, blast music, and stumble to class hungover, living the college dream. One evening, Jake was alone, hammering out a paper on his laptop, when he heard footsteps above him. Heavy ones, like someone in work boots pacing back and forth. The steps were slow, deliberate, maybe 10 feet from one side to the other. The thing was, their apartment was on the top floor. Above them was just the roof, no attic, no maintenance crawl space. Jake froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He thought maybe it was a neighbor, but the sound was too clear, too close, like it was right on top of him. He turned off his music and listened. The steps stopped, then started again, heavier, almost stomping. He grabbed his phone, ready to call Matt, but felt silly. What was he gonna say? I hear feet? He chalked it up to the building being old, maybe pipes or wind playing tricks. A week later, it happened again, but Matt was home, sprawled on the couch with a beer. They both heard it, thud, 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 pacing above the living room. Matt's eyes went wide and he grabbed a broom, banging the handle on the ceiling. Hey, cut it out, he yelled. The steps didn't even pause, just kept going, slow and steady. Jake and Matt looked at each other, half laughing, half freaked. They went outside, climbed the fire escape to check the roof. Nothing, no footprints, no debris, just gravel and a locked hatch. The fire escape itself was rusted, bolts loose, no way anyone was climbing it. Tyler got home later, and when they told him, he got excited. He was big into paranormal podcasts, always talking about EVPs and shadow figures. He suggested they record it next time, see if they could catch something. A few nights later, they set up Tyler's phone on the coffee table, mic on, and waited. Around 11 p.m. it started. Loud, unmistakable footsteps, pacing for maybe 15 minutes. None of them spoke, just sat there, goosebumps rising. The steps stopped abruptly, and they exhaled, thinking it was over. The next morning, they huddled around the phone to listen. The footsteps were there, clear as day, heavy and uneven, like someone dragging one foot. But there was more. A voice, low and rough, saying, "Get out. Now." It wasn't any of them. They'd been silent, barely breathing. Jake's hands shook as he paused the recording. They played it again, and the voice felt louder, angrier. Tyler, usually all bravado, looked pale. They went to the landlord, a grumpy guy who smoked cheap cigars. He laughed off their questions, said there was no apartment above them, just the roof, sealed tight for years. Jake wasn't satisfied. He searched online, found old tenant reviews mentioning weird noises and bad vibes in their unit. A local news archive mentioned a fire in the building in 1983. A guy died, some drifter who'd been squatting after getting evicted. He'd been trouble, starting fights, threatening neighbors. The fire started in his room, cause unknown, and they found him curled up in a corner like he'd been hiding. Jake, Matt, and Tyler didn't wait for answers. They broke their lease, paid a hefty fee, and moved to a tiny house across town, all 3 crammed into 2 bedrooms. They left furniture behind, anything to get out faster. Jake still keeps that recording, but he doesn't play it. Says it feels like inviting something back. Our third story is from Priya. a grad student at a university in California in 2019. Priya was a night owl, always in the campus library during finals season. The place was huge, a maze of bookshelves and study nooks, open 24/7 for desperate students. It had a Gothic vibe, stone walls, stained glass, and lights that never seemed bright enough. Priya loved it, especially after midnight when it was just her, a few stragglers, and the hum of vending machines. One night, around 1 a.m., she was deep in the stacks, hunting for a book on medieval poetry for her thesis. The aisles were tight, lined with dusty volumes, and the air smelled like old paper and wax. She noticed a guy at the end of the aisle, tall, in a dark hoodie, hood up, just standing there. He was facing her, but his head was tilted, like he was studying something on the shelf. Still, she felt his eyes on her, heavy and unblinking. She figured he was some undergrad, maybe stoned or lost, so she grabbed her book and moved to another section. The library was quiet, just the faint tap of her sneakers and the buzz of a dying bulb. A few minutes later, she felt a cold breeze, sharp and sudden, like someone had opened a freezer. The library was sealed, no windows, no drafts, but the chill settled into her bones. She glanced up, and there he was again, the hoodie guy, closer now, maybe 10 feet away. His face was visible under the hood, and it wasn't right, pale, almost gray, with eyes too dark, like they swallowed the light. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Priya's throat tightened. She backed away, clutching her book, and hurried to the main reading room, where a handful of students were hunched over laptops. She kept looking behind her, and he was there, following. Not running, not even walking fast, just gliding along, always the same distance. Her heart was hammering, but she didn't want to scream and look crazy. She found the security guard, a bored older guy named Ed, and told him someone was creeping her out. Ed sighed, like he'd heard it before, and walked her back to the stacks. The guy was gone, no trace, not even a scuff on the floor. Ed said it was probably a tired student pulling a prank, but Priya knew better. Those eyes weren't human. She started asking around, low-key, not wanting to sound paranoid. A senior in her program who'd worked at the library told her about the Watcher. Back in the 70s, a student had died in the stacks, heart attack during finals, found slumped against a shelf days later. People said he never left, that he'd watch late-night studiers, standing at the edges, silent and still. Priya laughed it off at first, but she couldn't shake the image of that face. She stopped going to the library at night, sticking to coffee shops or her apartment. Even in daylight, the library felt wrong. Too quiet, too heavy. She'd catch herself scanning aisles, expecting him. Once she swore she saw a shadow slip behind a shelf, too tall to be real. When she finished her degree, she donated her books to a community center, not the library. She didn't want any part of her staying there. Our final story is from Liam, a sophomore at a college in New York in 2022. Liam was in a film club, a tight-knit group that screened movies in an old lecture hall on campus. The hall was creepy as hell, built in the 1870s, with vaulted ceilings, dusty chandeliers that swayed in drafts, and rows of wooden seats that creaked like they were alive. The projector was ancient, flickering no matter how many times they replaced the bulb, and the room echoed in a way that made whispers sound like shouts. The club loved it, especially for horror nights. It was their spot, their ritual. One Tuesday, they were watching a slasher flick from the 80s, just 6 of them in this massive space. Liam, his buddy Alex, club president Jen, and 3 others. The movie was cheesy, all fake blood and bad acting, and they were cracking jokes. About an hour in, the projector cut out, screen going black, room plunging into darkness. They groaned, assuming it was the usual glitch. Jen fumbled with the controls while Alex yelled about budget cuts. Then a loud bang echoed from the back of the hall, sharp and heavy, like a chair had been thrown against the wall. The group went quiet, all eyes straining into the dark. Liam and Alex grabbed their phones, using the flashlights to check. They expected a tipped chair, maybe a prank from another club. but the back row was perfect. Chairs upright, no mess, no nothing. They laughed it off, nerves jangling, and Jen got the projector running. The movie played for maybe 10 minutes before it died again, this time with a low buzz like the power was choking. As they sat there cursing, they heard it, whispering. Not one voice, but a dozen, soft and overlapping, like a crowd muttering just out of earshot. It filled the room, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Liam's skin crawled. He couldn't make out words, just a tone, urgent, angry, restless. They checked the speakers, off. The movie was paused. Jen, who'd booked the hall for years, looked spooked, her usual confidence gone. She said she'd heard creaks before, maybe footsteps, but nothing like this. They decided to bail, packing up in record time, joking to hide how rattled they were. Liam realized he'd left his jacket on his seat. He told the others to go ahead. He'd catch up. Big mistake. He went back alone, phone light cutting through the gloom. The hall felt different, colder, like the heat had been sucked out. He grabbed his jacket, and as he turned, his light caught something in the far corner. A shadow, taller than a person, shapeless but solid, like ink pooling in the air. It didn't move, but Liam felt it watching, heavy and wrong. He bolted, legs shaking, and didn't stop until he was outside with the others. He told them what he saw, expecting them to laugh. Instead, Jen went quiet. After a minute, she admitted the hall had a reputation. It was built over a cemetery the college had relocated in the 1860s. Decades later, when they added a basement, workers found bones. Human, scattered, some still in scraps of cloth. The school buried the story, but rumors stuck. Students reported whispers, shadows, bangs in empty rooms. Faculty avoided teaching there at night. Liam quit the film club the next week. He still had classes in the hall sometimes, but he'd always take the aisle seat closest to the door, and he'd check the corners every few minutes, waiting for that shadow to reappear. That's it. 4 real stories from real students, each one a glimpse into the weird, creepy side of college life. Emily's whispers, Jake's footsteps, Priya's watcher, Liam's shadow. They didn't ask for this, but they got it anyway. Campuses are supposed to be about growth and good times, but sometimes they're stages for something darker. If you've got your own college horror story, drop it in the comments. I'm all ears. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Story 1 takes us to the dense, misty trails of Olympic National Park in Washington, 2017. Jake, a 32-year-old software engineer with a passion for the outdoors, decided to tackle a solo 5-day hike along the Hoh River Trail. He'd done this kind of thing before, knew how to pack light, read a topo map, and handle himself in the wild. The first day was textbook: towering cedars, the rush of the river, and a perfect campsite by a mossy clearing. He set up his tent, hung his food bag high to keep it from bears, and slept like a rock. Day 2, though, things got weird. Around noon, he checked his food cache from the night before and found it trashed. Not nibbled or clawed like a bear would do, just ripped open, contents scattered across the dirt. Oatmeal packets torn apart, protein bars unwrapped but uneaten. Odd, but he chalked it up to a curious animal, maybe a raccoon with too much time. He cleaned up, moved on, and set up camp deeper in the forest that night, making sure his food was hung even higher, tied tight with paracord. At 3 a.m., he bolted awake. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling his tent. Not the erratic scuffle of a deer or the lumbering shuffle of a bear. These were measured, like someone pacing. No twigs snapped, no leaves rustled beyond the steps. His heart pounded as he gripped his pocket knife, straining to hear more. No growls, no sniffs, no animal noises at all. Just the rhythmic crunch of boots on dirt. He shouted, "Who's there?" Silence. The steps stopped cold. He didn't sleep again, sitting rigid until dawn, knife in hand. Morning light revealed nothing at first. His tent was untouched, gear intact. Then he saw them. Footprints, human, barefoot, circling his campsite in a near-perfect ring. Deep heel marks like whoever it was weighed a ton or wanted to be noticed. No trail leading in or out, just the circle. Jake's stomach dropped. He was 20 miles from the trailhead, alone, with 3 days of supplies left. He packed in a frenzy, double-checking his map, and hiked out in one grueling 12-hour push, barely stopping to drink. At the ranger station, he spilled everything. The rangers listened, faces grim. They'd had reports of someone living off-grid in the park, someone who didn't want to be found, who'd been spotted watching hikers from the trees. They searched but found no one. Jake hasn't stepped foot in a forest since, and he keeps a bat by his bed now just in case. Next, we're on the desolate stretch of Interstate 80 in Nevada, 1999, with Carla, a 45-year-old trucker hauling freight cross-country. She'd been driving rigs for 15 years, tough as nails, used to long nights and sketchy rest stops. This run was routine. Denver to Sacramento. Nothing she hadn't done 100 times. Around 2 a.m., she pulled into a rest area near Winnemucca, one of those bare-bones spots with a couple of picnic tables and a cinder-block bathroom. Hers was the only truck until she noticed another rig parked way at the edge of the lot. Lights off, no one around. She didn't think much of it. Truckers keep odd hours. She locked her cab, drew the curtains, and settled in for a quick nap before hitting the road again. Then it started. A faint scratching on her driver's side door, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a key across the paint. She froze, thinking it might be a branch or debris caught under the truck. It stopped, and she relaxed, almost convincing herself it was nothing. Then it came again, louder, more insistent, nails raking metal. Her pulse spiked. She eased back the curtain, just a sliver, and saw him, a man, maybe 30, in ragged clothes, standing right by her door. His face was blank, eyes locked on the cab like he could see through the tinted glass. No expression, just staring. Carla's instincts screamed. She slammed the horn, a deafening blast that echoed across the empty lot. The guy stumbled back, then sprinted into the darkness beyond the sodium lights. She grabbed her CB radio, hands shaking, and called for any truckers nearby. No answer. She sat there, engine idling, headlights on, until dawn broke. When she finally climbed down, she found scratches etched into her door. Random, jagged lines, no pattern. She drove straight to a state trooper station to report it. The cops searched the area, found nothing but tire tracks from a car that didn't match any registered vehicle. The other trucker, who'd been parked across the lot, told police he'd seen a drifter hanging around earlier, muttering to himself, carrying a backpack stuffed with who knows what. Carla kept driving for years after, but she never stopped at that rest area again. She installed a second deadbolt on her cab door and started carrying a tire iron under her seat. Third story, we're in Ohio, 2011, with Ryan, a 20-year-old sophomore working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner off a quiet highway. The place was a relic. Greasy spoons, flickering neon sign, the kind of spot truckers and insomniacs kept alive. Ryan took the job for extra cash, figuring he could study during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. Most nights, it was just him, the cook, and maybe a handful of regulars. One guy stood out, older, maybe 50, always in a faded flannel. Came in every few nights for coffee, black, no sugar. Never talked much, just read the paper and left a decent tip. Ryan called him Flannel Guy in his head. This night, though, Flannel Guy was off. He showed up at 3:45 a.m., sat in his usual booth, but he was fidgety, tapping his mug, glancing at Ryan every few seconds. Ryan brushed it off. Maybe the guy was just wired. He took the order, same as always, but Flannel Guy's hands were trembling, and his eyes kept darting to the diner's back door, the one leading to the alley. Ryan served the coffee, made small talk, got nothing but a grunt. When it was time to pay, Flannel Guy leaned in close, too close, and muttered, "You should lock the back door tonight, kid." His voice was low, almost a growl. Ryan laughed nervously, thinking it was a weird joke, but the guy's face didn't crack. He paid and left. No tip this time. Uneasy, Ryan checked the back door. It was wide open, swinging on its hinges. He was sure he'd locked it at the start of his shift. Manager's orders, every night. His skin prickled as he slammed it shut, threw the deadbolt, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. He told the cook, who just shrugged and said kids always forgot to lock up. Ryan didn't buy it. He spent the rest of the shift jumping at every noise, checking the windows, expecting Flannel Guy to be standing there. Nothing happened, but he called his boss the next morning, told him about the door. That afternoon, cops showed up. Turns out there'd been a string of break-ins in the area, houses, a gas station, all within a mile of the diner. One homeowner said he saw a guy in a flannel shirt scoping out his place the night before. Ryan described Flannel Guy to the police, down to the scuffed boots and the way he stared. They never caught him, but Ryan quit a week later. He couldn't shake the feeling that Flannel Guy knew something about that open door, maybe even planned it. Fourth, we're in a small-town emergency room in Texas, 2005, with Emily, a 29-year-old nurse who'd seen her share of chaos, car wrecks, bar fights, the usual rural ER fare. This was a quiet Tuesday night, just her at the intake desk and a skeleton crew in back. Around 11 p.m., a man walked in, mid-40s, wearing a stained hoodie and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He clutched his chest, said he had pain, needed to see a doctor. Emily followed protocol, name, symptoms, insurance. He was vague, called himself John, no last name, said the pain came and went. His eyes kept scanning the room, not like he was nervous, more like he was casing it. Emily's gut twisted, but she buzzed him through to triage, staying calm. As he passed her desk, she caught a whiff of gasoline, sharp and unmistakable. Her mind raced. Spilled fuel from a car? A job at a pump? But his hands were in his pockets, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. She asked him to sit, said a nurse would be right there, then slipped her hand under the desk and hit the silent panic button. She'd never used it before, but something about this guy screamed wrong. She kept him talking, asking about his pain, his day, anything to stall. He gave short answers, kept shifting in his seat, one hand still buried in his pocket. 2 minutes later, security burst in. 2 guards, one with a taser drawn. The guy froze, then tried to bolt. They tackled him in the hallway. When they searched him, they found a Zippo lighter, a pocket knife, and a rag soaked in gas. He'd planned to set the ER on fire, maybe worse. Cops later said he'd been fired from a nearby garage, had a grudge against the hospital for reasons no one could pin down. Emily gave her statement, went home, and cried for hours. She stayed in nursing but moved to a bigger hospital with better security. She still checks patient IDs twice and never ignores a gut feeling. Last story, 2020, suburban Chicago, with Mike, a 27-year-old delivery driver for a major courier service. COVID had deliveries booming, and Mike was pulling 12-hour shifts, dropping packages from dawn to dusk. This was a late run, around 9 p.m., in a cookie-cutter neighborhood. Manicured lawns, porch lights, the works. He pulled up to a 2-story house, no different from the others, and grabbed a small box from his van. As he set it by the door, he heard a scream from inside. Sharp, female, cut off like someone clamped a hand over a mouth. Mike froze, package still in hand. He waited, listening, but it was dead quiet now, just the hum of his van's engine. He knocked, called out, "Delivery!" No answer. His first thought was to leave. Drivers aren't supposed to get involved. But the scream stuck with him, replaying in his head. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. He pulled out his phone, dialed 911, and told the dispatcher what he'd heard, giving the address. While he waited, he circled the house, staying on the sidewalk, looking for anything. Open windows, shadows moving. The place looked normal, curtains drawn, lights on upstairs. Cops arrived in under 10 minutes, 2 squad cars, no sirens. Mike explained again, feeling a little stupid now that the house was so still. The officers knocked, got no response, then forced the door. Mike stayed by his van, watching. Minutes later, they came out with a woman, maybe 30, shaken, but walking. Then they brought out a guy in cuffs, head down, not fighting. Paramedics showed up, checked the woman. She had bruises but was okay. Mike overheard the cops. Domestic call, the guy had snapped. Things got violent. Mike's dash cam caught the husband trying to slip out the back door while the police were up front. The footage helped nail the guy in court. Aggravated assault, plus a restraining order violation. Mike got a thank you from the woman's family, but he doesn't talk about it much. He switched to daytime routes after that, says the dark makes him hear that scream all over again. The Snowbound Strangler. In January 1997, Leadville, Colorado, a high-altitude town nestled in the Rockies, was slammed by a catastrophic blizzard that buried the area in over 6 feet of snow across 3 days. Winds screamed at 60 miles an hour, snapping power lines and plunging homes into darkness. Temperatures sank to -30, and roads were choked with drifts, stranding residents and halting emergency services. Sarah Mitchell, a 24-year-old barista with a warm smile, lived alone in a one-bedroom cabin on the town's fringes. She'd moved from Denver to escape city life, drawn to Leadville's quiet trails and snowy vistas, but that solitude became her undoing. On the 5th night of the storm, Sarah was rationing her last logs in a flickering wood stove, her breath visible in the dim light. Unbeknownst to her, David Kessler, a 35-year-old drifter with a rap sheet of assaults and burglaries, was holed up in a derelict shed 3/4 of a mile away. Kessler had been dodging police for months, living off stolen scraps. Frostbitten, starving, and half mad from the cold, he spotted Sarah's cabin, its faint glow a beacon in the whiteout. He trudged through waist-deep snow, his fingers numb, and reached her back porch. Using a rusted tire iron from the shed, he shattered a window, the sound muffled by the howling wind. Sarah, startled from her chair, grabbed a kitchen knife and shouted for him to leave. Kessler, wiry but strong, rushed her, knocking the knife away. When she clawed at his face, he seized a phone cord from a nearby table and strangled her, his hands trembling as her struggles faded. He spent hours in the cabin, wolfing down her canned soup, pocketing $90 from her purse, and stealing her insulated parka and a flashlight. He slipped back into the storm, leaving Sarah's body sprawled by the stove. The next afternoon, Tom Hargrove, a 62-year-old retiree who lived a half-mile away, fought through the snow to check on her, driven by a bad feeling. He found the broken window in Sarah's body, her face frozen in terror. With no working phones, Tom marked the cabin with a red scarf to guide police once the roads cleared. It took 3 days for a snowplow to reach Leadville's outskirts, and sheriff's deputies confirmed the murder. Kessler was nabbed 12 days later in a dive bar 40 miles away, Sarah's parka still zipped over his filthy clothes. Under questioning, he broke, admitting the storm's chaos let him move unseen. Sarah's death rocked Leadville, a grim lesson that winter's isolation can lure predators to even the safest homes. Story 2. The Ice Road Betrayal. In February 2010, a merciless snowstorm swept across Manitoba, Canada, turning the remote ice roads of Highway 391 into a frozen death trap. Snow fell in sheets, reducing visibility to a few feet, and gusts rocked vehicles off their paths. Mark Tremblay, a 42-year-old truck driver with 16 years hauling supplies to northern outposts, was grinding through the storm in his 18-wheeler, his wipers struggling against the ice. Around 1 a.m., with the mercury at -35, Mark spotted a figure on the roadside, waving a scarf like a distress signal. The man, who introduced himself as Paul, wore a threadbare jacket, his face chapped red from the cold. He spun a tail of his pickup sliding into a ditch, leaving him stranded for hours. Mark, a gruff but kind-hearted man known for aiding stranded drivers, waved him into the cab, handing over a thermos of coffee and a spare blanket. Paul thawed out, chatting about his supposed job as a mechanic in Thompson, 60 miles north. Mark, focused on the slick road, didn't notice Paul's eyes flicking to the dashboard, where Mark's wallet sat next to a pack of smokes. 40 minutes in, as they crawled through a barren stretch flanked by snowbanks, Paul's voice hardened. He demanded Mark's wallet, phone, and keys, pulling a 6-inch hunting knife from his boot. Mark, caught off guard, tried to talk him down, but Paul lunged, driving the blade into Mark's right shoulder. Blood gushed, soaking his flannel and dripping onto the seat. Pain exploded, But Mark, a former high school wrestler, reacted fast. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding wildly, and grabbed Paul's wrist, twisting until the knife fell. The two grappled, the cab a chaos of elbows and curses. Mark landed a punch, dazing Paul, then kicked open the passenger door and shoved him out into a snowbank, where he vanished in the swirling white. Mark, dizzy from blood loss, floored the gas, driving 30 miles to a lone gas station, his left hand clamping the wound. He stumbled inside, collapsing as the clerk, a 19-year-old kid, fumbled for the phone to call 911. A medevac chopper braved the storm to airlift Mark to Winnipeg, where surgeons saved his life after 4 hours in the OR. Police, using Mark's description, hunted for Paul, whose real name was Daniel Roy, a 29-year-old fugitive wanted for armed robberies in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Roy was caught 5 days later, hiding in a hunting shack, Mark's thermos still in his pack. Mark survived, but needed 6 months of rehab and lost 50% mobility in his arm, forcing him to retire from trucking. The betrayal, in the dead of a frozen night with no help for miles, shows how winter's desolation can turn a kind gesture into a fight for survival. Story 3. The Cabin Fever Killer. In December 1988, 5 college friends, Emily Carter, Brian Heller, Mike Larson, and 2 others, all in their mid-20s, rented a remote cabin in New York's Adirondack Mountains for a winter break. The group, bonded over years at Syracuse University, planned a week of skiing, snowboarding, and partying. The cabin, a weathered 2-story surrounded by dense pines, sat 15 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. It had a wood stove, a stack of board games, and a hunting rifle locked in a closet left by the owner. On day 2, a monstrous snowstorm roared in, dumping 8 feet of snow in 72 hours. The road disappeared, their Jeep Cherokee was buried to its roof, and the cabin's phone line went dead. At first, the group leaned into the adventure, stoking the fire, cracking open a case of beer, and swapping stories under flickering oil lamps. But Brian Heller, a 29-year-old grad student in engineering, started acting strange. Unbeknownst to his friends, Brian had been battling undiagnosed schizophrenia, his symptoms flaring under stress. He'd been skipping therapy and hiding his struggles, not wanting to burden the group. As the storm stretched into day 6, the cabin's coziness turned suffocating. Food dwindled to canned corn and stale bread, the woodpile shrank, and the endless gray light frayed tempers. Brian grew quiet, sitting alone by the window, staring into the snow. He began muttering about shadows moving outside, though his friends saw nothing. By day 8, tensions boiled. Mike, frustrated, snapped at Brian for hogging the last coffee. Brian, eyes wild, accused the group of whispering plans to ditch him in the storm. His paranoia festered, fed by sleepless nights and the cabin's claustrophobia. On the 10th night, after a shouting match over a spilled bottle of whiskey, Brian snapped. He pried open the storage closet, grabbing the .30-06 rifle and a box of ammo. Screaming that they were traitors plotting to kill him, he fired, hitting Emily Carter, a 26-year-old art major, in the chest. She collapsed, dead before she hit the floor. Mike Larson, diving for cover, took a bullet in the thigh, blood pooling on the pine boards. The others, Jen, Chris, and Sarah, rushed Brian, tackling him after a desperate struggle. Jen, a former soccer player, pinned his arms while Chris tied his wrists with a belt and duct tape. For 4 days, they huddled in the cabin, Mike slipping in and out of consciousness, his wound crudely bandaged with torn shirts. Brian ranted nonstop, claiming the snow itself was watching them. Emily's body, wrapped in a tarp, lay on the porch, preserved by the sub-zero cold. The group burned furniture to stay warm, their food gone, surviving on melted snow. When state troopers finally reached the cabin on snowmobiles, they found a scene of devastation. Brian was arrested, later diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, and committed to a psychiatric hospital after a trial that gripped the region. Mike survived but needed 2 surgeries and a year of rehab to walk again. Jen, Chris, and Sarah, scarred by guilt and nightmares, drifted apart, haunted by the memory of Emily's laugh cut short. The storm's relentless confinement combined ascending the throne of madness. Brian's fragile mind shattered, turning a dream vacation into a blood-soaked tragedy. These stories, Sarah's murder in her own home, Mark's betrayal on a desolate road, and Brian's descent into madness, show how winter's brutal conditions can amplify desperation, deceit, and psychological collapse. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. First, the body under the bed. You've probably heard this urban legend. Someone checks into a hotel, notices a weird smell, maybe some odd stains, and eventually discovers a dead body hidden under the mattress or in the box spring. It sounds like something straight out of a slasher flick, but it's happened more times than you'd want to believe. One of the most infamous cases was in 2010 at a budget lodge in Memphis, Tennessee. Guests checked into a room and immediately noticed a foul odor. They complained to the staff, but no one took it seriously at first. After days of sleeping in the room, they finally demanded a thorough inspection. What they found was horrifying. The decomposing body of Soni Millbrook, a missing woman, stuffed inside the bed frame. The smell wasn't just bad housekeeping, it was a crime scene. This wasn't a one-off either. In 1988, at a motel in Atlantic City, New Jersey, a couple found a body under their bed after noticing a strange smell. Another case in 1999 at a Days Inn in Colorado revealed a similar grim discovery. In Florida, a 2003 case at a Capri motel had guests unknowingly sleeping over a hidden corpse for days. These incidents often involve victims of foul play, hidden by perpetrators who bank on hotel staff not checking thoroughly. It's a stomach-churning reminder to maybe give your hotel room a once-over, especially if something smells off. The pattern across these cases is eerie. Cheap motels, lax cleaning protocols, and a body tucked away where no one thinks to look. It's enough to make you wonder how many other rooms might have hidden similar secrets. Next up, the poisoned Halloween candy scare. This is one of those warnings every kid hears growing up. Don't eat unwrapped candy. Check your treats. Strangers might be out to get you. Most of us roll our eyes, thinking it's just overprotective parents or urban myth nonsense. But in 1970, a horrific case in Pasadena, Texas, showed this fear isn't entirely baseless. 5-year-old Timothy O'Brien went trick-or-treating with his family, like any other kid. He ate some Pixie Stix candy from his haul and soon became violently ill. Tragically, he died before reaching the hospital. Tests revealed the candy was laced with cyanide, enough to kill multiple adults, let alone a child. At first, suspicion fell on some malicious neighbor handing out poisoned treats, fueling the urban legend we all know. But the truth was even darker. Timothy's own father, Ronald Clark O'Brien, had poisoned the candy to collect a life insurance policy he'd taken out on his son. He even gave tainted candy to other kids in the group to make it look random, though thankfully they didn't eat it. O'Brien was convicted and later executed, but the case left a lasting mark. It amplified fears about Halloween safety, leading to X-ray checks for candy and warnings that persist today. While random candy tampering is exceedingly rare, most cases involve someone known to the victim, not a stranger. The O'Brien tragedy proved the danger is real. It's a grim lesson. Maybe don't trust every piece of candy, especially if it's not factory sealed. Finally, the stranger in the house. This urban legend is the stuff of nightmares. You're home alone, getting creepy phone calls or texts, maybe hearing strange noises, only to realize the danger isn't outside. It's already inside your house. In 1987, a Chicago woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy lived this horror. She called 911, frantic, reporting that someone was trying to break into her apartment through her bathroom medicine cabinet. The operator thought it sounded bizarre. How could someone crawl through a cabinet? Police didn't respond urgently, assuming it was a misunderstanding. Days later, McCoy was found shot dead in her apartment. The investigation uncovered a chilling truth. Her public housing complex, part of Chicago's notorious Cabrini Green, had a design flaw. The walls were so thin and the medicine cabinets so poorly secured that intruders could pry them open and crawl between apartments. This wasn't a one-time thing. Residents reported multiple break-ins using the same method. Criminals, often from within the complex, exploited this to rob, assault, or worse. McCoy's murder, linked to a neighbor with a history of violence, became a symbol of neglect in public housing. Her story even inspired elements of the horror film Candyman, though the real version is far scarier because it's true. Similar cases have surfaced elsewhere, like a 2008 incident in New York, where a woman found a stranger hiding in her attic after weeks of odd noises. These stories tap into a primal fear. Your home, your safe space, isn't as secure as you think. What ties these legends together is how they exploit everyday settings, a hotel room, a Halloween hall, your own home, and turn them into scenes of horror. They're not about ghosts or monsters, but human actions, negligence, or malice, which makes them hit harder. The body under the bed exposes how little we check the spaces we trust. Poisoned candy reminds us that betrayal can come from those closest to us. And the stranger in the house? It's a warning that safety is never guaranteed, even behind locked doors. These cases, documented through police reports, court records, and news archives, show that urban legends don't need the supernatural to terrify. Reality's got that covered. Stay sharp out there.